That's why I want to go to South Africa, to join up with my oppressed brothers, to take up the struggle against the tyranny of the racist, fascist, white minority regime.
Fascist white regime.
One man, one vote?
One man, one vote.
Free South Africa, you dumb son of a bitch!
You dumb son of a bitch.
Look, I've heard just...
Apartheid in South Africa crumbled after Nelson Mandela walked to freedom. But black people suffered decades of government-backed injustice before it did. Apartheid really began in 1948, but separating black Africans from the white minority had long been a policy aim.
70 years have passed since the Nakba, the catastrophe in Arabic, took place in Palestine in 1948, in which more than 750,000 Palestinians were forcefully displaced from their homes and pushed into refugee camps in East Jerusalem, the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and neighboring countries.
We identify with the PLO because, just like ourselves, they are fighting for the right of self-determination.
Apartheid is an Afrikaans word meaning separateness or the state of being apart. So why is Israel called an apartheid state? In 1961, the South African Prime Minister and architect of South Africa's apartheid policies, Hendrik Verwoerd, himself recognized the similarities between his country and Israel. He dismissed Israel's vote against South African apartheid at the United Nations, saying, "Israel is not consistent in its new anti-apartheid attitude. They took Israel away from the Arabs after the Arabs lived there for 1,000 years. In that, I agree with them. Israel, like South Africa, is an apartheid state." The crime of apartheid under the Apartheid Convention and Rome Statute consists of three primary elements: an intention to maintain a system of domination by one racial group over another, systematic oppression by one racial group over another, one or more inhumane acts as defined carried out on a widespread or systematic basis pursuant to those policies. Inhumane acts included in both the International Apartheid Convention and the Rome Statute include forcible transfer, expropriation of landed property, creation of separate reserves and ghettos, the right to leave and to return to their country, and the right to a nationality, welcome to life for Palestinians in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories. In addition, the Rome Statute describes the crime against humanity of persecution as the intentional and severe deprivation of fundamental rights contrary to international law by reason of the identity of the group or collectivity, including on racial, national, or ethnic grounds. Since the foundation of the State of Israel, via the ethnic cleansing of up to 300,000 Palestinians from their ancestral homelands by Zionist militias in the 1948 Nakba, or catastrophe, and Israel's subsequent occupation of further territory after the 1967 war, there are now two groups in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories: Jewish Israelis and Palestinians, ruled by a primary sovereign, the Israeli government. A stated aim of this government is to ensure that Jewish Israelis maintain domination across Israel and the occupied territories.
One of my mentors, the late great C. Tessalone Keto, who was born in South Africa, trained as a historian, wrote a book called Vision, Identity, and Time. He basically was the first person to bring to my attention the history of South Africa and the process of telling the indigenous Africans they were not indigenous as part of the educational system. So they simply said, you all weren't here when we arrived. This is the formal education these people were getting. Also called them Kafirs, which is a derogatory term, as well as blacks. And what did the people who settled there, who were from the Netherlands and from the UK and other parts of Europe, but mostly from the Netherlands, meaning the Boers, and then like I said, many Brits. What did they call themselves? In particular, the Boers? Afrikaners. What do they call the language? Afrikaans. Think about what I'm saying. Psychologically, they got themselves and many of the Africans, thank goodness not all, but many of the Africans, to identify with being black more than they identify with being African. And then they formally, meaning the Boers, they formally called themselves Afrikaners, meaning Africans. So Think about that. So now you're the newcomer. You arrived in the Cape area a few hundred years ago. Yes, your ancestors have been here for a long time, for so long, if long means a few hundred years. But you have now mentally, and you might even say psychically, conveyed to yourselves you are more indigenous and have greater rights to the land than the people who you found when you got here. And you've convinced many of the people you found when you got here that they don't deserve to call themselves Africans, that they see themselves first as blacks.
Why are white people so intimidated and threatened by black men, despite their claims that black men are inferior to them and incapable of the most basic tasks?
Well, there's an easy answer to that question. They know black men are superior to them. Put us on any playing field, be it physics or football, and we will win. Give us the same opportunities, and we will win. Because we come from a history of not trying to destroy and dominate the world, and you come from a history of trying to destroy and dominate the world. And that has become the culture of the white community. So you go into your medicine, and your first open heart surgery as a black man, your first separating of Siamese twins as a black man, the creator that eventually produces your first artificial heart as a black man. You can just go on and on. A black janitor at Johns Hancock, all right, teaches your best surgeon, the janitor, who never went to med school. Give me a break. You got a TV set because of a black man. You got a cell phone because of a black man. You got a touchstone because of a black woman. You got the video game because of a black man. You've got the internet because of a brother from Ghana, Nigeria or Ghana, I think the brother's from. You got when we send messages on the computer. Like I'm gonna text you, what do you call it? Email. You have the email because of a black Indian man. And it's just all of the technology that you're using was created for your corporations by African peoples. All of it.
Hi guys, welcome to a new episode of Dudes Brewing. It's your boy Kells, back in the place to be. Sorry, I took a little bit of break. I was filming on a movie. Shouts to the director, Raj. And we got some cool stuff coming up for you guys. But back onto my content creation side. And as you may or may not know, it is African American History Month. As Africans, Americans, they may not understand because they're inside that echo chamber that you do have an interesting correlation to how what's happening in Palestine, how that is actually tied to you, because these people are Semitic, and you yourself as African, you are Semitic as well.
We are Africa! Hashtag free the Palestine. They are one of us. Remember, they are Africans, and we are one nation. We are one family, the family of Mama Africa.
So just to preface this conversation, just want to say, please watch this with a very open mind and open heart. And I'm coming from such a good and pure place, and a place of clarity, that I just only care to heal our planet as much as possible. And the best way to heal that is being able to spot patterns. Pattern recognition is the only thing humans can't hide from, which is your propensity to kind of do the same thing over and over and over again. And so other cultures can draw those parallels, and it makes us all have intellectual discourse. We exchange information to create a better society. And what's a shame is that we were all forced to speak English, but none of us are from England. But now they're upset. And when I say they, people that are in positions of power and their families have been in historical positions of power, now that we all speak the same language and now we can all spot parallels between what happened to our people versus what happened to someone else's people. So it all correlates. So nevertheless, please watch this and understand I'm coming from a good place, but it's very informative, very educational, and I think there's room for high-level conversations. Inshallah, back to what I was saying. So on this episode, we're just going to be covering a few topics, and before we get into it, I'm just going to preface this just to share with you guys, this is an issue when you tend to be a truth teller. Since being a child, I've had my childlike mind, and I never got rid of it. And because of that, I tend to spot things and question things that I notice are off, that do not make sense to me. For example, say real quickly, I grew up in a very Christian environment where my family was in Christianity, and I heard certain questions, and I'm like, so God and the Holy Spirit and Jesus are all the same person. And I'm saying, so wait, so Jesus is also his son? At the same time, he's a ghost. But he's also a father. And I just couldn't grasp and wrap my head around the Trinity concept. And I would ask these questions, and a lot of people didn't have answers for me.
I heard you once say Christianity never started as a religion, it started as a political system. Mm-hmm. How did Christianity evolve from a political system to a religion?
Well, when the political system that you're living in, like Christian, let's look at Christianity under the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire, which takes over much of what we call the Middle East and North Africa and the Mediterranean area, right on up to Spain, Britain, and the UK, and into what is Turkey. This is one of the biggest empires ever built in those days. And it's in this empire what we know as Christianity today is born. Now, Christianity as a method of looking at a people's spiritual system is born in Africa. Because the Ethiopian church is older than the Catholic Church, right? The ancient Sudanese church is older than the Catholic Church. But when people talk about Christianity, they start their genesis with the Catholic Church, and then Martin Luther in the 1500s. But by the time we get Martin Luther, the Ethiopian church is 1,000 years old. By the time we get the Catholic Church, the Ethiopian church is 500 years old. So we got to separate those two Christianities. I want to make that clear going in. The Christianity we know today, which starts out as Roman ideology after the Nicene Conference, where Rome has now militarily conquered all of what was the Greek world and the Egyptian world and the Mesopotamian world. It went there not to just conquer people. They wanted the olives. They wanted the grapes to make the wine. They wanted the wheat. They wanted the barley. They wanted the sheep. They wanted the cattle. They wanted the maize. They wanted all of the things. They wanted the silver. They wanted the iron. They wanted the gold. This is what they were invading people for, to steal their raw materials. The same reason they're doing it today on a larger, more high-tech scale. But once you do that, you got to now manage all these people. How do you do that? That's right. And so you said, well, what is it that they had that was working that we don't have? And so you call together the best of their spiritual minds at a conference called Nicaea. And he says, help me to construct a socialization process for the daily living of the people. Today we call that ideology. But then what happens, in the course of gathering all this wealth and power, you create another ideology, an economic ideology, which we now call capitalism. But to control the masses of people that feed that ideology, you still need your initial ideology, which is that socializing instrument, which we now will call religion. And religion partners with the capitalist ideology to do what we are seeing today. It's really not that complicated to watch the evolution if you just study history.
Being that Africa is such a massive landmass, many people struggle with categorizing African spirituality. Is African spirituality just the spiritual practices of the cultures we know about and have been exposed to? Or is African spirituality a representation of the spiritual practices of the entire continent?
Well, African spirituality is a misnomer because we don't approach things in Africa from an African spirituality perspective. That spirituality thing is kind of like an offshoot of how white people look at what they don't want to include in what they call religion. I talk about African sacred science, and it's universal to the continent. What's different is the ecology you find yourself trying to explain reality in, and the environment and what's the tools that are there for you to do that explaining. African spirituality is explaining cosmology and ecology to the human person and looking at the relationship between the three. What is the relationship to cosmology, cosmogony, and ecology and environment to the human being? And what is the human being's relationship to it? All right. The science that's explaining all of those things is called the African sacred science. That's what people are misnomerly calling African spirituality. It's universal to the continent because everybody's trying to explain the same thing. But if you're in the desert, you're not going to use the same tools that the person in the rainforest use. All right? If you're in the rainforest, you're not going to use the same tools that the people in the grassland plains are going to use, because what you have in your environment is different. So how do I explain the sun in the desert? What am I going to use? How do I explain the sun in the rainforest? But both of us will be trying to explain the sun because it's universal.
All right. That's you brought up something else I want to ask, right? Can the term you use, sacred science, so I'll just use that moving forward for this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can sacred sciences travel to a different environment? Because if you had that experience in a certain environment, can you have that experience in another environment?
Let me explain. You as human, whether you're in Timbuktu, South Africa, Nigeria, or China, your needs is fundamentally the same. Your clothing may change, your language may change, the type of food may change depending on what that environment grows. But the food that you eat will have to produce, even though there would be different foods, it'll have to produce the same vitamins you would need no matter where else you live in the world. That's sacred science. Okay? The moon is the moon. It's not going to change whether you live in China or South Carolina. The sun is the sun. It's not going to change whether you live in South Jersey or in Westchester County. Now, how do you explain the sun, and how do you make sure you get the healthy vitamin D energy of the sun that your body needs on a daily basis? It depends on the environment you're in. That'll determine what type of clothes you wear, what color clothes you wear, right? How heavy the clothes, how thin the clothes. That'll determine what other supplementary stuff you have to eat to make sure you're getting enough vitamin D, right? So if I need to make sure I'm getting the necessary nutrients that if I get from greens, but I'm living in an environment where I can't grow a lot of green, then can I find that same nutrient in some sort of seafood or in an animal food or in a fruit? You understand? Nothing would change. Your body's needs remain the same. But what in your environment that you have to use to fulfill that need may change because ecologically you're in a different setting. All right? The sacred science is your understanding of the setting you're in and its relationship to you and how you interrelate. You know? How do you interrelate? The sun is the sun. The sun don't go to China and say, okay, today I'm the Chinese sun, and start speaking Chinese. It's the sun. The Chinese person have to explain their relationship to the sun. They may use mythology, allegory, folklore, fairy tales as teaching tools for their population to explain the value of the sun to them and the danger of the sun to them. Same thing for us. If we lived in Congo, we would use different tools than the Chinese, but we would have to explain the same thing. What is the value of the sun to us? What is the value of the sun to the plants that we eat? What is the value? You know, when I eat a plant, I'm virtually eating sunlight, right? I'm eating sunlight. Now, in certain environments, they can't grow a whole lot of plants, so they can't get sunlight that way, so they got to eat a lot of fish to get that same vitamin D. Okay, and so African sacred science is understanding ecology, you know, environment, cosmology, and the human being's role in all of this. And so if you live in Nigeria and you got in, like your family, more than likely you're from Ghana, and more than likely you're from the Akan people where Nana and Kofi came from, and Kojo. All three of those are Akan names. And so when you left Ghana for Jamaica, nothing changed except the ecology. The Akan people, who makes up the majority of the Jamaican people's population, right? When they left Ghana and Ivory Coast, where the predominant Akan people live in West Africa, they didn't stop being Akans, nor did they need change. What changed was the environment. Now they have to identify new sources of the nutrients they need to survive. But the nutrients needed is the same nutrient needed when they were in Ghana. Now what has changed is how I acquire them and what kind of rituals I attach to them. Okay, a ritual could be a prayer, a libation, a song, a dance, a drum rhythm, you know, to celebrate that we have in this month, this fruit is growing, so breadfruit is a big deal this month. Mango coming at a certain season, mango, people may look and think it's just some juicy, sweet, sugary fruit, but mango brings all kinds of nutrients to the table, you know what I'm saying? Well, African people knew this, you know, bananas, plantain, yams. And so I may not be able to grow the yam the way I did in Africa, but I know in this part of the environment in Jamaica, I could find yam growing wild, right? And so I have a yam festival every year in Ghana. Well, I have a yam festival in Jamaica too. But I may do a different dance than they did in Ghana because we were different people under different circumstances. But nothing has changed about our fundamental need from nature. That is the sacred science, to understand that. What is that fundamental need from nature that the human being requires? What is the fundamental understanding between knowing when the star's right there and the Big Dipper's right there and it's turned this way, at the same time on Earth, this thing is happening. And if I watch it long enough and it comes back around the next year, when the Big Dipper's there and his handle is turned this way, at the same time on Earth, that same thing is happening, I go, aha, that's the law. That's the law of God, or that's the law of nature, or that's a fundamental, that's African sacred science. Understanding the relationship between cosmology and ecology, and our role in it. And much of what the West called his science is stolen African sacred science. And it didn't even steal it. We gave it to them because most of them derive into Western culture during the period of enslavement, which he calls this period of the Renaissance and Enlightenment. That's the period when he's got millions of African people's mind enslaved, creating his, what would become his, what they call that thing, Industrial Revolution.
Hey guys, if you want to watch more clips, click here.
And if you want to watch the full podcast, click right here.